This content should not be construed as financial or investment advice. I am simply sharing my personal views and perspectives, which I hope will educate and inform and help give you the confidence to make your own financial decisions. If you need financial investment advice, please seek in-person advice from a qualified, experienced, and regulated finance professional. YouTube will not save you.
Okay, so I'm the fourth accountant. It's a new day and a new way for the Chancellor to think about taxing income. So in my algorithmic bubble, what has been doing the rounds is that allegedly, or apparently, I think it's actually been confirmed, the Chancellor will be introducing a 22% levy on all cash held in an ISA, which goes over and above the allowance essentially. So what the Chancellor recently announced, or relatively recently announced in the budget, I think it was in 2025, late last year, so it's normally around autumn, the UK budget happens, is that she'll be restricting the ISA allowance on cash and shares and ISAs. So previously this had been about £20,000 and it could be any combination of cash and shares. But then she's since restricted it to about £12,000, I believe, with a smaller limit on cash, and then the majority of that allowance being restricted to shares that are wrapped in this ISA vehicle. And this restriction doesn't apply to anyone over 65 who would typically be retired. So this was an expected change she was going to make to the cash ISA. It was something we knew was going to happen as part of this smorgasbord of taxes in lots of different areas, and it supplemented the additional tax she introduced on savings interest in general. And it was to offset essentially basically the inability, based on her promises when Labour were campaigning to come into power, not to increase income tax generally on workers. So although this was an unpopular change to the ISA because it was limiting it, there was an idea or feeling essentially that you could get around this by basically leaving your cash uninvested. So if you think about some apps, and these are not apps I'm promoting by the way, but if you think about apps like Trading 212, Toro, I think there's a number of different apps you can think of as well where you normally do your investing. What you would do is you would deposit cash initially, and then you would then use that cash to buy shares or stocks or ETFs or whatever, right? But often what they are now offering is that if you just leave that cash in that account, they will offer you interest similar to just basically having a savings account. So essentially what Rachel Reeves is doing by introducing this levy is removing this loophole, and in my view just tightening the application of this restriction or reduction on the ISA allowance, and basically saying you must use the shares and ISA account for its intended purpose, i.e. to invest in shares, and then use a specific cash product to then put cash savings in an ISA wrapper. So basically, in a nutshell, if you just do what you're supposed to do and put your cash in the right ISA bucket and simply use your share ISA account for buying shares, then this levy will not impact you. However, between now and when this comes into play, and I think it'll be around April 2027, I'll fact check this in this video and add the details for the specific timeline. You just need to make sure you transition any cash in your shares ISA account into a cash ISA account essentially. And then that way, by the time you get to this new deadline, provided you're within the allowances, so basically you don't go over your ISA limits, you should be fine. So in that context, one could argue, well, what is the problem? What is the issue? And I think the reason why this is doing the rounds on the internet and why this is problematic is twofold, right? So there's a perception issue whereby, you know, workers in general are receiving a lot of income tax rises, right? So during the budget announcement in 2025, she introduced duties in lieu of not raising VAT. She introduced an extra 2% on interest. She didn't increase the lower tax-free allowance of £12,570, I believe. She introduced a rental tax. She introduced an additional tax on homes over 5 million and 2 million pounds. And she introduced a gambling duty as well, or at least increased it. So there was all these additional taxes that were introduced on basically ordinary people, ordinary workers, and those that own homes rather than portfolios of properties. And it went against the spirit of their campaign and their campaign mandate, which was to ensure there'd be no taxes that, you know, overwhelmingly or disproportionately impacted the cost of living on ordinary workers. Now, the justification for this, and this context really is important, was that the Chancellor wanted to commit to fiscal rules, and this is primarily to satisfy the market rather than us. So let's just be clear about that. And she also wanted to make sure she was in a position whereby she could continue to invest in public infrastructure and offer things like an uncapped child welfare allowance as well. So typically that had been restricted for 2 children, but now she was making that available for, you know, all children, you know, across the UK, with the idea that she was bringing children and poor families out of poverty. So this is the wider context in which we have to see much of what is going on and the decisions the Chancellor is making, and specifically the decision to remove this potential loophole regarding the cash ISA restriction. So in essence, when you take all of these things into account, it does actually make sense. And the reason I say that is because one of the things she recently announced was a sales tax holiday of sorts, whereby she'll be reducing VAT or sales tax by 15% for particular child-related services. And this was something I talked about in a previous video. And essentially, if she's doing these things and she's offering, you know, some sort of allowance or some sort of holiday, because she has these fiscal rules and she's committing to maintaining a certain level of public expenditure, whether that's welfare, whether that's the NHS and offering more salaries, or whether that's just investment schemes in terms of building infrastructure, say in the north of the UK, then if she's giving with one hand, she needs to make sure that whatever rules she's applied to take away with the other hand, i.e. to make sure that, you know, people are not avoiding taxes through cash ISA loopholes or ISA product loopholes, she needs to make sure that basically that avenue is cut, so that therefore she can then stick to her fiscal rules, ensure she's reducing the deficit, which was another commitment she made during her budget, and what was a forecast to happen according to the OBR, and keep the markets, who the UK borrows from, satisfied. So all of this kind of makes sense from her perspective. And I think from the workers' perspective and from my perspective, it just reinforces potentially what you may already believe around Labour, would be my view. So if you view Labour and Rachel Reeves as doing the responsible thing, doing the right thing, you buy into their economic policies, you buy into their manifesto, then something like this shouldn't really be an issue for you, simply because it tightens, in my view, the actual rules she put in place in the budget, right? It's not an additional tax as such, I would say. I would almost view it as a penalty for not complying with the new cash rules, cash ISA rules, i.e. you use your cash ISA to put your cash deposits, and that will be protected provided it doesn't go over the limit, and you use your shares and stocks ISA for shares and stocks. And if you do that, this levy, this penalty, will not apply. But if you don't do that, then the penalty will apply. But the reason it's going to create an issue is because historically, ISAs have been viewed as a place that is safe psychologically for many people. It's one of the few areas where people can look and think about building wealth without worrying about tax. And if you factor in now that if you have a high value home, which again typically would be another safe place to build wealth, you know, from a tax perspective, that avenue to a certain degree has now been taken away by looking at this more aggressive levy on top of council tax for homes that are over 5 million and 2 million pounds, right? So it just feels like, from a tax perspective, if you're a worker, very oppressive, because you're thinking about tax from all sorts of different angles, where historically you didn't really have to consider or think about tax or tax planning. Whilst if you're an ultra high net worth individual, or somebody who doesn't have to worry about their primary residence as their source of wealth, who doesn't have to think about maximizing their cash ISA accounts, then none of these things, none of these changes impact you in any way. And if there's a position where Labour is adopting, where they want to really come down on any sort of tax avoidance, tax evasion, and again, you have to think about making tax digital as well, and the intention behind that, to make sure that those that are working in the gig economy are also declaring their tax. What I've always said, and what I said in my video covering the budget, is that that's all well and good, but where is this energy and this assertiveness when considering a wealth tax? And I think for me, we're kind of scraping the barrel a little bit when we think about taxing duties, introducing a gambling tax, introducing a small levy on rental income, introducing 2% on savings interest. These are all low-hanging fruit, small gains. It just increases the cost of living on workers, but leaves the ultra high net worth individuals unaffected. It does not address wealth inequality and wealth distribution, and therefore the cost of living, which is something Labour says they care about, continues to be eroded away for ordinary people. So I think for me, I don't have an issue with this levy per se, because it is consistent with Labour's position as a matter of principle. However, I think the issue is the principle and the tax arrangements and the wider context of what Labour is doing and how they approach tax in general. That for me is where there's going to be a problem. And I think that is what a lot of content creators and influencers are picking up on. It's the principle of what is going on, right? And I think, unfortunately, Labour will pay for this in some way in the next round of national and local elections, because, as I say, reform will be coming in and making a lot of headway by offering, I think, a lot of tax breaks, and I think the Tories also will do a similar thing. And I think what the Green Party will do is that they will lean into the feeling and the sentiment around a wealth tax. So either way, those parties are going to be offering a real alternative to the approach Labour is taking, which tends to be tinkering and sort of very small changes to taxes, which ultimately just make ordinary people and the middle class, I would argue, worse off. But let me know your thoughts around this. I think it'll be really interesting to hear from yourselves and get a view around how you view this change to the cash ISA scheme and how it's affected you. But otherwise, until next time, take care. Peace.